You all doing today? It is good to see you on this segment of This Week in Supervision. I'm excited about what I have to share with y'all today. We're going to try to jump on in. Let's see. I got to check the time. Okay. And we're going to try to make this happen. But we're going to be talking a little bit about, of course, what we talked, some of the things that we discussed in supervision. We talked about a number of things. One of them being CPT codes, something I feel that is not stressed enough. In school and things like that. We generally are having to learn. Out of all my supervisees, I don't know if it was anybody, maybe one or two out of my three groups that kind of understood that. And so, that's something I think that it'd be good to kind of know a little bit about before getting into the workforce or private practice. And so we discussed the CPT codes, and what we did is we shared a video. I like to share videos about that, right? And then we also discussed a little bit about. We talked a little bit about the difference between agoraphobia and claustrophobia. I always tell people kind of from the hood, but you say claustrophobia, clausto. You left that R out. It's claustrophobia. I hope I'm saying that right now. But I still kind of default to claustro. If you hear me say claustrophobia, just forgive me. But anyway, so we talked about that and the difference between that and agoraphobia. And so let's talk a little bit about that. But just before we get into that, I do want to share my screen real quick and let you all know about some of our upcoming events. All right. And so we have coming up, and we had a great live on Tuesday of this week, and we passed out CUs for that yesterday. But it was awesome, and so you all don't want to miss that. We especially if you're a part of Social Workers of Alabama, you get some benefits with some of these CUs. But we do have this training here. It's our DSM-5 training. That is the training that is now required for all clinical social workers in Alabama. But if you're not in Alabama, you're welcome to take it as well. And so we want to see you there for that. We'll be having that on February 16th. All right. And then here we have our supervisor training, which is coming up at the end of this month. Come check us out. It's a 2-day training. If you're ready to take things up, ready to become a little bit more independent, it may be time to go on and get that supervision certification. And so we have what you need here. It's a 2-day training, total of, depending on what you do, 12 to 16 CEUs. Okay, so let's go on and get into what we have to talk about. Oh, we will have another scheduled training for those of you who are part of Social Workers Alabama. You kind of get that discount on this training. But we're hoping to have it on the 20th, and this one's going to be relative to the subject of EMDR. I'm excited about that because I kind of want to do some work there. All right, where are we? Okay, we spent 3 minutes on that. That's too much. All right, let's get into what we talked about. All right, and so with these CPT codes, and for those of y'all who are not familiar with CPT codes, these are the codes that are used to help us to understand and determine if well, it helps when billing is done through the EHR systems, things like that, where they can identify, are we seeing a client for individual therapy? Are we seeing them for group? Are we seeing them for couples? Which is a whole thing about couples, because technically, if you ever want to get into seeing couples, for the most part, most insurance don't pay for couples therapy per se. But if you talk to them, they will say that they pay for, or they will reimburse for family sessions or family therapy. And the family therapy can include you treating an identified client and then having a family member to join. And so we discuss the nuances behind that. Um, I'm not 100% on that. There's so many different things as far as the rules that's behind that. But we talked about some of the variation of rules. How do we identify? How do we, determine who's the identified client if we are seeing two? Somebody wants to come in for marriage counseling or something like that. Okay, and then we identified, just a few other things. And this is, I want to share my screen real quick. Um, and I would get into the video, but it's just going to take up too much of our time. But let me show you what ChatGPT did for us, right? And so this is literally, and this thing hasn't been working well for me, but I use the Evernote, and so it kind of sections things out for me, so I can always come back to this training if I chose to do it. And so that's really good for you all, you supervisors, to look into this or some type of software like this. But I went to ChatGPT and I took this YouTube clip. I got the transcript. I ran it off, ran it through ChatGPT, and it helped me with asking a few questions. And so I posed these questions to the group. What is the main difference between the CPT codes for 90846 versus 90847? You know, with one of these codes, you're going to be seeing the identified client, or you'll be seeing a family member along with the identified client. They'll both be in a session. One, you'll be seeing the family member without the client, the actual client being present. And so for this one, of course, the answer is B. It's relative. The difference in the codes is relative to whether the patient is present or not. Okay. And that's a simple way to break it down. Those codes based on whether the patient is present or not. In some really unique cases, which I can't even explain. And I'm not gonna get into it, but like kind of if you work with let me just stop while I'm ahead because we're already running out of time. So let's go through another one. When is it appropriate to use individual psychotherapy codes instead of family codes? So that means, when is it appropriate for me to use a psychotherapy code for just one person versus the family? And for the most part, the answer for this one is going to be D, when only one person benefits. Okay. And so what we learned from this video is that, at least according to what Therapy Notes is saying, I use Therapy Notes. In their EHR system, they record all the information that you send in for billing, or the notes that you write on the patient. This is a good resource if you're needing resources for that. But so what the question is, when is it appropriate to use individual psychotherapy codes instead of family codes? And when only one person benefits. Okay. So what we're talking about here is, if you have a family code, um, I'm drawing a blank here, y'all. I'm sorry. When is it appropriate to use individual psychotherapy? This is what happens when you go live. It's been a long wait. When is it appropriate to use individual psychotherapy codes instead of family codes? Oh, so what I wanted to say based on that is that, and this is a big deal, a 90837 code is an individual psychotherapy code, which means that you're using this code because for the most part you're just seeing one person. Now I'm gonna tell you something about this, why this matters. There's a significant difference from the clinician for what that code will pay you. Uh, for instance, if you were with Blue Cross, this code might pay, over 100 and something dollars, maybe $140, something like that, versus if you do a couples code, or not a couples code, or a conjoint code, or a family code, which is the 90846 or 90847. This you the reimbursement can significantly be reduced, almost as much as half. Like, you might only get 70 or $80 for that code, right? And so if you're billing these wrong, it could end up being a major situation, because it can appear that you're being fraudulent as far as how you're billing as an independent practitioner. These codes need to be correct, right? Okay. And so when we have the family code versus the individual code, what they stress to learn, and it's important to learn, is that, let's just say that you're seeing someone who, you're seeing them one-on-one, and then a family member wants to join. Let's just say they just join for maybe a couple of sessions. What they're saying in this video, and they know more about this than me, is that for that particular situation, you would not have to bill a separate code. In other words, you can bill the 90837 code, which generally for most insurances reimburses more, because this person isn't going to be there ongoing. They're not going to be there ongoing. They're just coming there. Now, if they're going to be in the session ongoing, then we would do a 908 for 7. If you're billing for say the family member or the let's just say the spouse comes in to the session and you're just seeing them for a few sessions, you build a 90846. Okay. And sometimes I mix these codes up, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, so that was just some of the things that we got into, because I think that it's important that we know this. um and we're already 10 minutes in. I want to switch up a little bit to what else we talked about in the session. um and I used another video to give a demonstration of how we determine the difference between agoraphobia. The primary difference is between agoraphobia and claustrophobia. What's the difference? Like, do you know what distinguishes the two? And so we kind of started off talking about that. We showed a video, which I'm not going to show here, but basically it was supposed to be humor, but basically it demonstrated someone having fear leaving the house, but then, I mean, being inside the house. So when they were inside the house, they had a fear, but then when they went outside of the house, they had a fear as well. So then they went back inside the house and they had a fear, and it kind of went like that. And that was something kind of to glue that in the mind. So the difference being that if I'm inside my house and I feel uncomfortable and I'm having a fear, I'm more likely meeting the criteria for what? Okay, I'm more so meeting the criteria for claustrophobia, because this is an enclosed space, right? Um, and the fear, a lot of times when we have these phobias, is it outweighs the actual danger, is what makes it a phobia, and sometimes it leads to panic attacks, and so we end up treating a number of things. Okay, and so when I have a fear of open spaces, that means that I'm generally probably having agoraphobic type of symptoms there, right? And so another question I asked the group is, what describe to me what are other symptoms of agoraphobia? Now, you've probably heard me talk about this, and what I do is just share what's in the group. A lot of times I'm bringing these things back to them because it takes a minute for it to settle. Even for me doing this a long time, it makes me fresh just kind of going over this in repetition. As my pastor used to say, Pastor Burr, repetition deepens the impression. So we want to keep exposing them to it until you see that the group has this glued down. And what you'll see over time, the memory of this diminishes, and that's why a lot of times we'll show the video. Okay, so that was the difference. So what are some other symptoms of agoraphobia? Well, guess what? If you've ever known someone who has a pretty significant fear of transportation on a plane, they're just scared of getting on a plane. There we go. They may have agoraphobia. Fear of public transportation, just period, is a symptom of agoraphobia. But not just that. I always say we have fear of transportation. Have fear of um, open spaces. Uh, I say places. So we have a fear of open places, closed spaces, crowds, and a fear of maybe being outside of the home alone. Okay. And so these are some symptoms that we have. We didn't really even get to most of these multiple choice because our sessions are about an hour and we really dug down into things fast. One thing that I like to emphasize too, and we're going to end here, is that guess what? Like, what I asked them the question, and I like to ask this question over and over again because I think it helps with treatment. So, and I want to ask you, for a good deal of phobias, because if you look at the Greek for phobia, it's phobos, and I may not be saying that right, but it's a fear. Some descriptions even say it's a morbid fear. In other words, like fear of, well, it's a morbid fear. So the question is, I'm kind of messing it up. The question is, like, what is ultimately the ultimate fear that many people experience when they have fear of like snakes? What's the fear of spiders? Arachnophobia, fear of needles. Okay. Fear of heights, these types of fears. Okay. Even fear of dogs or certain types of animals. In these cases, with these types of phobias, many times the ultimate fear is, have you answered that question? The ultimate fear is death. And I'll quickly use an example of that for my personal life of me experiencing that. And I've processed this out with so many clients, and that's what a lot of times it ends up being. It's not always the case, but you want to rule this out because unconsciously, sometimes we have these fears, of death, and it shows up in our lifestyle. So what happened to me, I was having some pre-diabetic stuff going on. I started needing to prick my finger, and guess what? Some of y'all know because you're afraid of needles. When I started to prick my finger, uh-oh, we gotta stop. I found out after processing the fear of pricking my finger, because when you try to prick your finger, some of y'all don't get scared when I'm doing it. You have to push out the blood, right? And so what I was afraid and having fear of is that I would just totally bleed out. I felt that if I pressed hard enough, I would totally bleed out and then I would die. And just understanding that, I was able to process with myself that, hey, that's a ridiculous. And most of the times, the underlying thoughts are ridiculous. They really don't make a lot of sense. You won't believe them. Nobody else will believe them either. And that's okay because that helps you many times to overcome it. Well, we're going to end there. I hope to see you all again when we have this week in supervision next week. Hopefully, this information has been helpful and you all have a blessed and safe weekend. Y'all take care now. All right. Bye-bye.